Well, hey friends, it's Pastor Mitchell here, and I want to say thanks so much for joining us today from wherever you are watching from. We hope that today's church online experience is an encouragement to you, but it's also helpful in figuring out what it means to trust in and follow Jesus. Now, I want to get to just a few things as we look forward in terms of the ministry of the church and where we're headed over the next little bit. But before I do so, I just want to make mention of one thing, and that is that last weekend, Argyle lost a legend. Gary Green passed away, and so to you, the family, we just want to continue to extend our sympathy and support. We love you. We pray for you often. We will continue to uphold you in prayer, asking God's comfort and peace for you during this time and these days. And to you as a church, I know many of you have reached out to the family with words of encouragement and sharing pictures and lots of other things. And I want to encourage you to continue to do so and to continue to pray for Gary's family during this time. But also, if you wanted to pop by and see Linda, I'm sure that would be an encouragement to her as well. Now, this past week as well, there's been an announcement from the province about a plan for a phased reopening again of some of the restrictions being lifted. And we're excited about that. It's trending in the right direction. There's been now a shot of hope for the future. And well, for some of us, it's been a long time coming and seems like it can't come fast enough. Others of us feel a little bit more cautious about that. And so recognizing all those things, I want to mention to you that as we figure out what all that plans means for us in terms of ministries through the week and what happens outside of Sundays, we will continue to update you on that as we have those plans available. But here's what it does mean I can share today, that for next Sunday, while masks and social distancing are still going to be a thing, we are going to be able to increase our capacity for the number of people allowed in the building, and we're going to begin singing together again. Now, I know that as we think about worship and what it means to worship God, that certainly involves a lot more than singing, but it certainly includes singing. And for some of us, we've really missed that, and we're going to be joining together as we worship in song next Sunday. So come prepared to sing your heart out. We're looking forward to meeting together, and I hope and pray that you will join us either in person or online as we continue to meet to encourage one another daily, so that we might again fulfill the mission and ministry that God has given us of leading people to trust in and follow Jesus.
So many reasons, too many to count, to say that I love you, to worship you now. Your love is perfect, your heart is kind. I'm yours forever, forever you're mine. Jesus, the anthem of my heart. Jesus, the anchor of my soul. I'm overwhelmed by all you are. Oh, how I love you. You call me beloved. Call me friend. Your grace says I'm worthy. You welcome me in. Now all that I long for and all that I need is to be in your presence. Forever I fall at your feet. Jesus, the anthem of my heart. Your beauty never fades. What else can I say? So many reasons to love you. Oh, so many reasons to love you. Oh, Jesus, the anthem of my heart. Jesus, the anchor of my soul. I'm overwhelmed by all you are. Oh, how I love you. Jesus, the anthem of my heart. Jesus, the anchor of my soul. I'm overwhelmed by all you are. Oh, how I love you. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. I'll worship your holy name. The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. I'll worship your holy name.
You're rich in love and you're slow to anger. Your name is great and your heart is kind. For all your goodness I will keep on singing. 10,000 reasons for my heart to find.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. I'll worship your holy name. And on that day when my strength is failing, the end draws near and my time has come. Still my soul will sing your praise unending. 10,000 years and then forevermore. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. I worship your holy name. God, I worship your holy name.
There are so many stories I could tell you from the 14 summers I spent working at a Christian camp and retreat center here on the South Shore of Nova Scotia. Some of them are absolutely hilarious, and I still laugh about them to this day. There's been moments too of profound significance and life change, and then there's all the other ones in between. But there's this one in particular I was thinking about this week where I was reminded of as I was reading through Ecclesiastes chapter 3 in preparation for today. And it's a moment in the middle of the summer where there was this preteen who I saw walking across the yard with his cabin leader headed toward my office, and I realized something was up, and so I went out and met them and kind of asked what was going on, and the cabin leader kind of explained a little bit to me, and so did the camper, and we kind of chatted for a while, and then I said, well, let's go sit down at the picnic table, and what we discovered was that this camper in particular was a good kid. He just was very disruptive when it came to cabin devotions, and so when the cabin leader was trying to, either read from the Bible or ask a question or talk about certain things, he would just talk over top of them, and he just wouldn't stop talking, and he kept interrupting and being disruptive, and this is about the third day of this, and the cabin leader had tried to be helpful. He would pull them aside and say, could you just please nod, or what can we do to make this help? Can I get you involved even? And none of those things seemed to really be working, and so kind of as a last ditch attempt, he brought him to me. And so as we sat down at the picnic table, we kind of started talking, and one of the things that I said to him, as I said to this camper, I said, listen, can you read well? And he says, yeah, I think so. I said, let me go get something. So I brought my Bible back, and I turned to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and I sat it down in front of him, and I said, why don't you just read this for me? Just a few verses, see how you make out. And so he kind of humored me for a bit. He's like, yeah, okay, let's do it. So he started to read. He said, for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. And he looks at me kind of quizzically, and I said, yeah, just keep reading. And so he does, and he reads down, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. And he just kind of stops and he looks at me. He's like, what are we doing here? And I said, no, just a few more verses. Just want you to read a few more verses. So again, he humored me a little bit more and kept reading. He says, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow. And then he stopped and he looked at me. I said, yeah, just one more verse. And he read, a time to keep silent and a time to speak. And then he paused with his finger on the page, and he looked up at me and he says, yeah, I see where this is going. And so we had this chat about when was a good time to keep silent and when was a good time to speak. And as I was thinking about this passage in preparation for today, it's fascinating for so much of life. There are questions about whether we should or shouldn't do certain things, absolutely. But there's another piece to that puzzle that's so important, isn't there? It's the piece of timing. Not just the question of whether we should do something or whether we should not do something, but when is the right time to do or to not do a certain thing. We talk about timing, and it's so important for so many aspects of our lives. Good timing or bad can have one result or another. This Christmas, my kids, both of them got smartwatches, just the kids' version of a smartwatch, and there's little games they can play on it. It tells the time and stuff. But one of the things our kids discovered about them is that you can set alarms on these watches, which was disastrous for a few days in our house. But it brought about this really funny moment one day when our kids had spent the afternoon before setting all these alarms for the next day, and the alarm, you could actually say what the alarm is for. And so they set all these alarms. The next morning they get up, they got their watches on, and Ryan, his watch had gone off. Oh, it's time to get dressed, and oh, it's time to eat breakfast now. And so he's sitting down at the coffee table eating this bowl of cereal, and right in the middle of eating, no word of a lie, his alarm goes off on his phone, and he looks up and he goes, oh, it's an alarm. And he looks at it and he says, oh, I got to go. And we're like, go? Where do you have to go? He says, it's time. Well, what is it time for? It's time to brush my teeth, he said. So he ran down the hall, got the toothpaste and his toothbrush, he brushes his teeth, comes back and finishes his breakfast. And we all just busted a gut laughing because, well, you know, you're not supposed to brush your teeth till after you're done eating. But his alarm told him it was the right time to eat his breakfast. It was the right time to brush his teeth. And so the issue of timing is an incredibly important one, isn't it? I mean, we talk about timing in regards to a lot of things in life. Is it the right time to ask that person out? Is it the right time to make that phone call or to have the conversation? Or what time did the text come in? You know, is it time, if you've ever considered a move out of an apartment maybe to a house, or maybe to a new house or to a new neighborhood? Is this the right time for me or for my family to move? Is this the right time to make that big purchase, to trade in the car, or, you know, to buy whatever the big purchase is? Do we have the right amount of cash? Is it the right moment for us to do that, or are there other things we need to consider? Maybe you've wondered if it's time to walk away from something, to move on to something else. Maybe you've wondered, is this the right time to open my mouth, or is this the time to keep my mouth shut? There's all kinds of things that we wonder, when is the right time? Because again, the right timing of something can produce extraordinary results, but poor timing in something can mean a missed opportunity, and in some cases can actually make things worse. And so the author of Ecclesiastes, or at least the teacher that we're introduced to, at this point in the writing, the teacher interjects this poem about time and timing. And this poem highlights a series of contrasts of human activities. There's a time to do this, but then there's a time to refrain from doing that. Or there's a time to do one thing, and then there's a time to do the opposite. And a lot of what he says, I think we would agree with wholeheartedly. Yes, there are appropriate times and moments to do certain things, and there's appropriate times and moments to refrain from doing certain things. And so he gives us this whole list. He says, for everything there is a season. That's just kind of the introduction to the poem. For everything there's a season and a time, for every matter under heaven. There's a defined allotment with a beginning and an end for what he says, every matter under heaven. And he talks about it at time and seasons. Now, we look at that and we see, well, that's true in the natural world. In the natural world, there are seasons throughout the year, that the weather patterns change, that we experience different temperatures. And so while that's true, there are seasons in life naturally, there are also seasons in life in terms of human activity. We might talk about a season that we went through where we, struggled with depression, or a season in our life that our marriage was, really, really unhealthy, or that we dealt with substance abuse, or maybe there was a season that, we had the dream job, or things were just firing on all cylinders, or maybe it was a good fishing season, or we talk about seasons in that way. We talk about certain parts of our life as being, a busy season, like tax season or fishing season. We know things are going to get all amped up and ramped up, and there's going to be overtime, and we're going to get tired, and we've got to manage our time well. And then there's other seasons where we slow down and where things just aren't as busy, where the pace slows. And so we talk about life not just in the natural world of having seasons and times, but also in human activity. There are seasons in which we do certain things and don't do certain things. And what he says about all of that is that there are times and seasons for every activity under the sun. That is just simply his way of saying, as we've said all along, for life on earth, every matter under heaven. And so he says there's a time to be born and a time to die. There's this defined allotment to our lives, and it's not all the same for all of us, but we know there's a start and a finish. There's a beginning and an end. And usually neither of those, when they happen, are the most convenient. Oh, there might might be some things about it that seem to play out to be convenient, but sometimes it's not. I mean, babies are going to arrive when they're ready. It could be the middle of the night, it could be the middle of the afternoon. You may not have quite got to the hospital yet, or maybe you've been there for a few days. It's all in a matter of the time when it happens. And then when we talk about the other end of life, about death itself, we say things like, it was time, or their time was cut short, or they didn't get enough time, or we didn't get enough time with them. But there is a time when that happens for all of us, a time to be born and a time to die. There's a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. And again, we know this naturally, that there's a good window in which you should plant seeds. There's a good time of the year when you should put the flowers in the soil. There's a good time of the year when you need to make sure that those crops get in, because if you don't, they're not going to be ready for the other time when it's time to pull up the harvest. It's not going to be, the right time. There's not going to have been enough time for things to grow and to mature and to ripen. And so when that happens, though, you've got, again, another window of time where it's the optimal moment to pull up what is ready to be pulled. And if you wait too long, there's going to be a frost, or if you wait too long, it's going to snow and the crops could get ruined. There's all about timing and planting and harvesting. He says there's a time to kill and a time to heal. He's not necessarily talking about murder here. This isn't an extended commentary on the morality of taking someone else's life, although it's suggested that maybe he does have some kind of thing in mind about the taking of a life, whether in self-defense or through a judicial process of some kind, and we could debate and argue about those things, but it could be about the killing of an animal for food. It could be the taking of a life of an animal for another reason. And so there's a time that's appropriate to go duck hunting. There's a time that's appropriate for deer hunting or for moose hunting, right? There's a time to kill, but there's also a time to heal, to mend, to restore health, to take what is ill or sick or dying and to give it what is necessary in order for healing to happen. He says there's a time to break down and a time to build up. There are appropriate moments in life to tear things apart, right? There's appropriate moments to remove something. And so if you're renovating your house, I mean, if you ever watch Fixer Upper, it's demo day, right? Everybody's favorite. You come in with a sledgehammer and you tear the wall out and you pull the kitchen cabinets out and you're just destroying everything. And it's not because you're on a tear or a rampage of some kind. It's like, no, that work needs to happen in order for something else to happen. There's a time to tear something down or to remove something, but it's in order to build something back in its place, or to build it up, or to build something different, to renovate, to kind of put back together. And not only in terms of construction or homes, there's a lot of talk these days about deconstructing faith, about pulling back all the layers in Christianity, and questioning everything, and why do we do this, and why do we do that, and do we really believe this, and does this make sense? And people go through this process at varying levels in their lives, and if that's you right now, deconstruction can be helpful and good to a certain degree, but if you're not going to build something back up, then maybe you're going to miss the point and you're going to be left with nothing. And so there is a time to tear apart, but there's another time to rebuild as well. He goes on to say there's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. There are good and appropriate moments just to sit down and have a good cry. Whether it's a blubber cry, it's a soft cry, whatever kind of cry. But listen to me, crying can be so helpful and cathartic. Crying can be so good for our healing. There's an appropriate time to cry or to weep when we mourn the loss of something. To cry is human and to cry is helpful. But there's also a time to laugh. Just one of those big belly laughs where your whole belly shakes, right? Just the deep, or this, high-pitched resonance, whatever kind of laugh you have. Maybe it's even a snort laugh. I don't know, but like we'd all laugh at that too. And but like laughing is so good for the soul in the right moment. And man, we just need to have, for some of us, we got to sit down and have a good cry and let it out emotionally. For some of us, we just need to find a space or something that just makes us laugh to restore some of that joy again. That's so helpful for our emotions, for our souls. There's an appropriate time to mourn something, the loss of something, to grieve and to let go of something or someone. Those are appropriate moments in our lives too. And then there's a time also to dance, to celebrate, to turn up that bass, to bust a move, and I'm not a big dancer. I mean, I could attest to that right up front. Nobody wants to see me dance, but man, whatever moves you've got, just go for it. Turn the music up, whether you're just snapping your fingers and swaying your hips, or you just got the little bit going on, right? Like whatever dancing you may do, like there's an appropriate time to dance. He goes on and he says this, there is a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones. And man, in my life right now, I know exactly how true this is, because every time we walk Daniels Head Beach, what do the kids want to do? They want to find beach rocks, and they want to pick them up and put them in a little Ziploc bag. And it seems like there was a period in our lives where like every single rock that they saw, they wanted to pick up and take home. Not that we're advocating taking home beach rocks, because I don't think you're supposed to do that, but here they are, and they got their rocks in a bag, and they're looking through them. It's like, I want that one and that one and that one and that one. It gets so heavy, and can you carry my bag now? And so we kind of get to the end of the walk, and it's like, okay, we got all these rocks now. What are we taking home? Well, the answer is all of them. And it's like, no. There's a time to pick up stones, and there's a time to scatter stones. And right now is the time to scatter some stones. And so there's these moments where it's like, yeah, it's good to collect rocks maybe, but there's a time to throw them away. And what the teacher probably has in mind here is kind of, preparing a field for harvest, and, to kind of pull up those stones, or in some cases, they would destroy a field by covering it with rocks. And so this is what's in mind, but there's a time for collecting and for scattering. There's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. And if you've ever been in a relationship, you know exactly what that's like. There's a moment where giving your significant other a hug can mean so much. And then there's other moments where trying to give them a hug isn't going to solve anything. And so there's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. There's a time to be around other people in close proximity, and there's a time when that's not appropriate. For example, last week I was quite sick for a few days, and Carolyn just looked at me and said, "You are stuck in your room. There's a bathroom off that room. You use that one. You sleep in that bed. I'm blowing up the air mattress. Don't come anywhere near the rest of us until you're feeling better." There's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. And so I've been stuck in quarantine in my own room for a while, so that I would, not spread disease and germs and sickness was the point. And so there's a time for those things. He says there's a time to seek, verse 6, and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away. There's a time for us to look for something that we've lost maybe, or to look for something that we've never actually found before. And so there's a time to go looking, but then there's a time to give up on that search. There's a time to stop looking. There's a time to, cut your losses and to walk away from what it is you're seeking. There's a time also, he says, not only to seek and to lose things, but there's a time to keep and a time to cast away. There's a time to kind of hoard up, right? Not that we're, again, advocating hoarding, but there's a time to throw away. Now, all of you probably know I'm kind of more in the throwaway end of things. I am by no means a hoarder. The less stuff, the better for me. And so all the minimalists out there, I know you're cheering right now, like, let's just go on a purge. Let's throw out everything in the house. house, we'll keep 5 things and that'll be it, right? And so, for some of us, we get a little, well, maybe let's not quite go that far. We got to temper that back a little bit, right? So, but there is a time to keep and a time to throw things away. He says there's a time to tear and a time to sew. And so shout out to Quilts by Hilts. Janaea, this past year, we got in touch with her. She's been making these fabulous quilts where you can kind of give her some t-shirts or some fabrics of things that you've had before, and she'll put it together in all this nice quilt. So one of the things that we did, or that Carolyn did, I should say, from when the kids were really little, is she kind of stored away clothes and some of those favorite outfits of our kids that they had from when they were kind of really little. We've kind of kept in a bag. And last year at some point, she kind of went through them all and pulled out, I think it was a dozen kind of t-shirts for Emma and a dozen for Ryan, and some of the ones that we can remember them in, even as we think back when they were 2 and 3 years old. And we took them to Janae and said, Janae, can you make a quilt out of these? And she did. And so she kind of had to take those t-shirts and she had to tear away the seams and she had to cut pieces out of them so that she could stitch them all together into this beautiful quilt for each of our kids. And so now they've got these nice quilts with like a dozen, again, t-shirts on them from when they were really, really little that bring back the memories of those moments from when they were really small kids. And so there's a time to cut things away and to, again, sew back together or to rebuild a piece of it. There's a time to be silent and a time to speak. There is a time to open your mouth, and there is another time to keep your mouth shut. The thing is that when you read through the wisdom literature of the scriptures, one of the consistent themes throughout is that the wise person refrains from speaking more often than the fool. The fool often is shooting off his mouth about one thing or another, an opinion or a piece or a thing, and ends up just spreading all these words out. And what ends up happening is that we begin to discover a lot of foolishness being spoken, and the wise person is more calculated. The wise person is more contemplative, thinks through what he is about to say or think or feel in order to gauge his or her words carefully. And so there's a time to speak and a time to not speak. And the thing is that even in our world right now, there's so many people with so many opinions on everything, and they expect everybody to have an opinion on everything. And the question becomes, even if you do have an opinion on everything, does that mean you have to share your opinion on everything in the moment? The answer, I think, is no. Just because you have an opinion doesn't mean you have to say it. Now, there's certainly a time to share your opinion. There's certainly a time to share your perspective, but free speech or being free to speak or to have an opinion doesn't mean you should always speak or always share your opinion. Again, the wise person is more calculated in his or her words. And so just because we are free to speak doesn't mean we should always speak what we think or feel or our opinion on things. There's a time to keep silent and a time to speak. In verse 8, he says there's a time to love and a time to hate. There's certain things about this life that we should love. In fact, Jesus even pushes the envelope for us in terms of our perspective on who or what we should love. The question gets asked through the New Testament, what benefit is it to you if you only love those who love you? I mean, even evil people do that. And Jesus says that you are to love your enemies, which means to actually seek for and desire their goods, because that's exactly what he did. But there's also a time to hate. And there's lots of things through the scriptures that we begin to understand that God hates. He hates idolatry. He hates hypocrisy. He hates arrogance and pride. He hates evil activity. And the call in all of those things is to repent or to turn from those things, to change your mind about those things, to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the two greatest commandments. And so there's a time to love and a time to hate. There's a time for war, he says, and a time for peace. There's a time for nations to intervene into circumstances and situations. There's a time for nations to defend their borders or their people. There's a time for countries and nations to work in harmony toward the welfare of the world and the common good. And so there's a time for war and a time for peace. There's so many more things that could be added to this poem, I think, that the teacher could say, but let's just kind of stop there because that's where he stops, but let's just take a moment and think. My guess is, as I said from the beginning, that most of the disagreements that we have about things are not necessarily about the things themselves, although that happens from time to time. But it's not about whether something should or shouldn't be, and sometimes it is, but there's more to it than that. Sometimes the disagreements that we have is about the timing of those things. When is the right moment to do or to say or to act? And the thing is about that is that for the most part, a lot of us are just guessing. It's a guessing game about when the right time or moment is. And the reason why it's a guessing game is because we as human beings can't see the whole picture. We don't have all the information. In fact, we have a limited perspective. We have a limited view. Even our access to the appropriate data might be limited. Things that may change our minds or our opinions that we haven't heard. And so the thing is that while we think it might be the right time to do something, we might say something like, well, your guess is as good as mine as to when the right moment is. Now, there are some people, granted, who think that they have it all figured out. They've got all the pieces together. They've got not only the situation figured out exactly, they've got the person figured out exactly. This is what they are, what they do, how they respond, and a lot of that has to do with a sense of stability in life, because if I can kind of define something, then that gives me, a stability. I feel like the ground's solid under my feet. When that happens, it's, there's this sense of control that we feel, that maybe I can manipulate the outcome because I know everything about the thing, and so I can move it in a certain direction. So whether it's for stability or control or some other reason, some people might feel like they've got everything just all figured out and can't understand why nobody else does. But the thing is that all of us are limited. All of us, in some ways, there's at least some measure where we're taking a guess at something. Now, that's the view from inside. This is what the teacher's saying 2,500 to 3,000 years ago. I mean, you take a view from the outside, even if we could have a bird's eye view. You think, I have a picture on a wall in my office from 1990. The picture itself isn't from 1990, but the picture was taken in 1990. And it's a picture taken by Voyager 1, where from 6 billion kilometers away, this satellite turned and took one last photo of our solar system. And it's this incredible photo because, there's not much to it. There's a few light beams that come from the camera lens and a few other things, but less than 1 pixel large in that photo is this little dot in the photo. And amongst the vastness of space and even this part of our solar system. And Carl Sagan, when he looked at the picture, and the picture's been famously called this ever since he made the phrase, he calls it the pale blue dot. Because hidden in that picture, in a frame that's less than 1 pixel large, is our planet Earth in the vastness of space. And we have this outside perspective of this pale blue dot in the universe. And even from that perspective of outside looking in with a wider lens view, we are still dealing with the same issues that the teacher speaks about. And in verse 9, he goes on to say, "What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with." Now, this isn't anything new for him. He asked the question, what gain is there? It's a question he repeatedly asks. What do we have in the end? What is to our advantage? I've seen everything that God has given us as human beings to do. There's nothing new for me, and nothing surprises me. But then he says he has made everything beautiful in its time. In other words, God has this ability to do what is appropriate and what is good in the right moment. In fact, even beyond that, that God has the ability to work good out of some of the worst things imaginable. God has made everything beautiful in its time. I mean, you think there's so many examples we could have out of Scripture for this, but I think probably the most immediate one that comes to mind is Jesus, the life of Jesus, the Son of God sent to this earth to not only show us the way to God, but to be the way to God, to bring light into darkness, to bring vitality to our lives, to find our true meaning, purpose, and significance. And yet Jesus, at the end of his life, was betrayed by someone close to him. He was arrested. He was deserted. He was unjustly treated. He was mocked and publicly humiliated. He was murdered and crucified. And yet, he didn't open his mouth. He didn't incite a rebellion. He didn't call on the angel armies to come and deliver him. And yet what he did is what he endured it all, knowing what it would accomplish for us, to the glory of God. Our salvation from sin and its consequence, from sin and death and hell, was purchased through the hell that Jesus endured for our sake, to the glory of God. He has made everything beautiful in its time. That's why, as followers of Jesus, we look back at his crucifixion and we rejoice in that, not because we see what is the injustice that's happening to Jesus, not because we think that any part of that was good, except for what it would accomplish for us, that he willingly laid down his life that we may be set free. And so we think about the fact that God has made everything beautiful in its time. But he goes on to say this, the teacher does. He says, also he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from beginning to end. He has set within us this longing and this desire for meaning, purpose, and significance, for something lasting that comes out of our lives that goes beyond the time we're born and the time we die. People desire to know how their life fits into the bigger story. What about my life is going to count, that outlasts me, or even counts for the moment? But how do we fit into this bigger part? There's a longing inside all of us that from time to time that question gets raised through time or circumstance that we need to wrestle down and discover. But what the teacher says is that God has put that eternity into our hearts, but we cannot find out what God has done from the beginning and the end. In other words, God has not given us the blueprint of all of his timing, of all the things he will do and when. And what happens is that this gets super frustrating for us at times, doesn't it? I mean, sometimes, we get so bent out of shape over this because our knowledge, again, and our understanding, again, we know that God's put eternity in our hearts, and we know that he's working for a bigger picture, but man, sometimes it's just so unclear about what our part is in what he is doing. And the teacher says that God has done this for a particular reason. So listen, we've all been in those places, I think, that we've prayed prayers of desperation. God, I don't know what you're doing right now. God, what are you trying to teach me right now? God, why are you allowing this to happen? I mean, I've certainly gone through those seasons of my life where I've just prayed and prayed and prayed. God, help me. God, show me. God, lead me. God, do what is right. God, just make it so clear so I can just take the next step and know what the right thing is to do. I've been there before, and I'm sure you have too. It's also led us to, sometimes we have this fear of missing out on God's will or God's best. And man, if we don't have it all figured out, maybe we're going to miss it. Maybe for some of us, it's just this, weird speculation that can happen, because we have hints and pieces about what will happen, that God has written the end of the story and given it to us. And so we take things out of that and we start applying them to our particular circumstances, thinking that this can only mean this for us right here on the South Shore of Nova Scotia in this moment and in this time. And that must be exactly what it is. I mean, there's been so many conversations, just to pick on one, around the end of the world. And is this the beginning of that end? And what's the mark of the beast? And do you know those conversations have been happening for 2 millennia ever since Jesus said that? There are so many times and moments through history where people thought they had it all figured out because they read a verse in the Bible and looked at their circumstances and said, this must be exactly it. Right? The mark of the beast, was the social insurance number that the government issued when those started happening. It was the chip on your bank card when you would, pay with tap. It was the next thing was, it would just move from one thing to another, whether it's masks or vaccines or something else. It must be the mark of the beast, and we have to resist and reject. And maybe we've just missed something along the way about what that truly is. Maybe we've missed something along the way about what's actually going on. And so there's this sense which, because God has not given us the blueprint of the timing of everything in our lives, that we have these desperate prayers and these fears of missing out, or maybe these misconceptions about what may or may not be happening in our world. But he does leave us with this in verse 14. The teacher says, I perceived that whatever God does endures forever, and nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken away from it. And so there's this reality that's a contrast to our lives that listen, well, what we strive for in life under the sun may not produce the meaning, purpose, and significance we desire. That what God does endures forever. His activity above and below the sun is something that is lasting. It can't be improved on. It can't be overthrown. It can't be stopped. What God purposes he will do, he will actually bring to completion. And the teacher says that God has done it so that people would fear before him, that they would recognize that he is God and that we are not. And while his purpose and his plans will endure forever, there's nothing we can do to overthrow that. There's nothing human beings can do to improve on it. He will accomplish all he desires in his right time. And the reason he does that is so that we would fear him. And the teacher goes on to say, even in verses 16 to 22 of chapter 3, that God in the end will actually deal with the righteous and the evil. God will actually deal with the righteous and the wicked, and he will bring even justice to everyone. It's a theme we'll pick up at another time, but all of this to say that this perspective should be something that brings us to trust God in the best and in the worst of times. In the right time, when the right thing happens, in the timing where the timing seems off and it doesn't quite work how we thought or desired, whether the time is right or the time is not, the call for us is to trust God, whose eternal purpose will always stand, because he makes everything beautiful in its time. And he hasn't given us the blueprint of his timing for everything so that we would learn to fear, to honor, to trust him in all times. And so for you and I, when the water gets muddy, when things aren't as clear, keep doing what is clear. When there are things in your life that you're not sure about what the next step is, keep doing the thing that you know is the right thing. And in the middle of those uncertain, unclear times, I want to encourage you and me to pray this prayer. It's simply this: God, I don't know what to do. Or God, I don't know what to think, but I do trust you in the middle of it. God, I don't know what to do or think, but I do trust you in the middle of it. And I'm telling you, that takes a lot of humility. But I want to remind you that God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. He'll make everything beautiful in its time.